The first episode of Rick and Morty season 9 just released, and wow, I have to say this might be the best season premiere episode in the whole series. Let's break down the whole episode, scene by scene, because this was a doozy of an episode. Before getting into the episode itself, we have to take a look at the title. The name There's Something About Morty is a nod to the 1998 film There's Something About Mary, where two men fight for the affection of one woman. As you can expect, that ties in a lot with this episode. Okay, so the episode's cold open starts off pretty normal. It starts with a remixed version of a song from There's Something About Mary. Morty comes into frame like he's walking on sunshine while slurping on a drink from 7-Eleven. Jerry and Beth are outside enjoying their pool, and Jerry, being the klutz he is, falls into the pool with Beth laughing at him. Summer is lying on the couch playing around on her phone, and the whole family seems to be in a very upbeat mood. Morty walks into the garage and he begins to reference how much he admires 7-Elevens, and especially all the big and innovative ones. But I'm much more of a Buc-ee's kind of guy myself. But anyways, Rick is just like his granddaughter and he's texting away with an unknown person. In Rick's garage he has a few interesting items we haven't seen before. A squid alien creature in a container, a random bullseye, and other generic sci-fi lab equipment. Also, for some reason, there seems to be some sort of instruction pamphlet, which is very unlike Rick, who literally makes everything from scratch. So seeing him having to rely on something like that is pretty weird. Rick is inventing a self-cooling beer, which is also a little weird for him because he usually only drinks stuff much harder than beer. Morty and Rick start to bicker over who Rick is texting, and it leads to them breaking literally everything on Rick's workbench, even spilling Morty's drink from 7-Eleven. Morty pries away Rick's phone, and would you look at that, it lands perfectly vertical. Anyways, just then, Rick receives a text from, oh no, evil freaking Morty. In the main part of the episode, Morty heavily complains to Rick about him texting evil Morty, but as Rick tells him, evil Morty has actually been threatening to erase the entire Smith family using the Omega device blueprints he stole from Rick Prime in season 7, if Rick doesn't help him with various things. Rick and Morty continue to argue, but then evil Morty decides to show up in person the second Rick ignores his call. Evil Morty and normal Morty both argue back and forth about each other's relationship with Rick, and evil Morty takes the both of them through one of his portals to a hideout where he has built a modified version of the Omega device, keeping a version of the Smith family ready in case anything were ever to happen to him. Evil Morty shows off a few realities, and some of them are definitely interesting. We have some regular Ricks, Doofus Rick, Summer in a dimension where she turns into Jerry just like Morty did in the Fearhole episode, a Cyclops Summer, a Terminator Summer, presumably their Beth enjoying the pool, Beth just like how she was dressed up in a Mortican graffiti, Beth and Morty from a dimension where she got remarried to Paul Fleischman from Morty Night Run, and where everyone has beards, and 3 dimensions where Jerry is extremely defenseless. In the device, evil Morty doesn't have a hostage of himself, because if he were to erase Morty, he would just erase himself. But also, even if he erased one of Morty's family members, it would just be pointless, because Morty's would just go after him the same way that Rick's went after Rick Prime for killing Diane. Evil Morty briefs Rick and Morty on a large entity trying to destroy the multiverse that feeds on and uses technology made by lower life forms. For the first time, we actually get to see Rick go out of the central finite curve, where he reaches the Collector, just as it absorbs an entire world, turning everything in its path to miniature versions of itself. But it almost immediately sees them in Rick's ship, and so Rick makes Morty get inside of a protective suit, since this adventure is much more high stakes than their usual shenanigans. Rick and evil Morty use their tech, mainly Rick's car, to break through the collective and get to its physical presence. Rick's car has its entire glass shield disabled, and it ejected the 3 of them. Morty just bounces around with his suit, but Rick and evil Morty use their yin and yang like technology to fly around and work together to bring down the collective, all while Morty waddles around in his suit being useless. Evil Morty disguises both him and our Morty as a part of the collective using a sample he got earlier. Rick and Morty, however, both kind of get owned by the collective's advanced tech, and Morty, like an idiot, starts to ruin their plan with his horrible acting, but like usual, it was more or less part of Rick's plan because he had the creature absorb an algorithm designed to fry it. Using that, they cause the collective to absorb itself into a simple little USB stick. After the big fight, both evil Morty and Rick poke fun at our Morty for his uselessness. It's also revealed that this type of outing is usual for Rick and evil Morty, and they do it pretty much every week. At this point, evil Morty starts to see the insecurities in Morty, and tries to make them even worse. Evil Morty leads them all to a diner to get waffles, but the entire time he's nothing but insufferable to Morty and flexing his relationship with Rick. Evil Morty orders 2 milkshakes and Rick a coffee with vodka in it. The diner they are in is one of the most alien-like in the whole show, and it's full of species that we've seen as early as season 1. Evil Morty keeps on bragging to Morty about how much more powerful and better he is than him, and Rick can't handle it, so he excuses himself to the bathroom. Surprisingly, when Morty listens to all the stuff Evil Morty has to say, he isn't really defensive or insecure anymore. Instead, he seems mad and willing to throw a punch. Evil Morty is so annoying in this scene, and Morty handles it so well that I definitely feel like our Morty could beat him in a battle any day of the week. Rick comes back from the bathroom with an electric mood because apparently he had such a good poop that it changed his whole brain. I have no idea. Evil Morty tries to stay as the one in charge and acts like he's the only powerful one there, and as if he has to be the one to dismiss Rick and Morty. When Evil Morty gets done with his milkshakes, however, he returns to his base to discover that his Omega device was annihilated, and all of the blueprints are gone too. The only thing left behind is a crude picture of Rick. He called Rick right after, but Rick finally wised up and blocked him. Rick incredibly outsmarted Evil Morty and put the blueprints for the Omega device in the device itself so that it cannot be rebuilt. He also takes Morty with him back to the Central Finite Curve, and when they get back, Rick uses his ship as an actual car for the first time, and then he transports the entire Smith house to another dimension. Rick explains to Morty why he had to build an entire bunker dimension to protect himself in case anything like this ever were to happen, and it comes with as much protection as they could ever need. In the second half of the episode, Rick plans out his defense against Evil Morty, where he maps out a reference to every appearance and tool he's used in the series. On the table, we can see that Rick made an entire fast food chain for the bunker dimension called Bunker Burger. He also gives the entire family pills that keeps them protected. Rick said that he didn't bring Space Beth with him because she's mean to him sometimes. And also, Jerry is completely unaware that there is even an Evil Morty. Rick also discovers one of Evil Morty's weaknesses, which is the cooldown of his palm laser. Rick tells his family also that if Evil Morty were to corner them, they should yell a slur. I'm just hoping that it's not Clip-Clop. In the bunker dimension, everyone but the Smiths have crazy combat training. I have no idea why, but I laughed so hard when I saw Combat Gene. I don't even know why it's funny, but it is. After Rick's planning, he asked for questions, and of course Jerry would have one, and of course Rick would ignore him. After all the harassment Morty took, he finally shows some insecurities and asks Rick if he likes Evil Morty, and Rick promises him that he doesn't. Even though it's supposed to be safe, Evil Morty finds a way to them. Rick uses super cool machinery that acts like Thor's hammer Mjolnir, and Rick uses every weapon he can to target Evil Morty's ship, but he was never even inside. Evil Morty dodges literally every bullet they throw at him, and then very sadly he obliterates Bunker Gene. That might be the new saddest death in the show in my opinion. Anyways, the big confrontation we've been waiting for between Rick and Evil Morty finally happens, and it looks like Evil Morty's tech clears Rick. He slaps him around and has a counter for almost all of Rick's moves. However, after a lot of back and forth, it looks like Evil Morty finally won. He even takes Rick's brain as a trophy, but unfortunately for him, Rick's lifeless legs manage to bring Rick back together piece by piece, and then they just sit there and scream at each other. Basically, they just kill each other's nanobots, and after that's all done, our Morty leaps onto Evil Morty and starts throwing punches. But as that happens, Evil Morty loses his eye patch, and Rick is put in a classic choose who to shoot situation. But Rick is smarter than Evil Morty at the end of the day, and he uses a button to inflate Morty's protective suit from earlier and identify the right Morty. Rick tries to blow up Evil Morty, but he has a force field stopping that. But in Rick's attempt, he finally manages to deactivate it. Morty actually manages to get off some pretty sick roasts against Evil Morty, and he wins the argument. But Evil Morty runs away only to get beaten up by the entire family. When Evil Morty uses his laser to try and kill Jerry, Beth remembers his weakness and they all jump on him during his downtime. But Evil Morty pulls out a device just like the one Rick used to freeze time in season 1. Welp, now it looks like Evil Morty really won, and Rick is finally going to lose. However, there's one thing Evil Morty forgot. You don't mess with time. Instantly, he is surrounded by the same time police that tried to arrest Rick when he used the same device in season 1. Evil Morty gets taken away by the police, and during all of this, there was a few things I noticed. First of all, Summer immediately hops back on her phone, which is pretty usual for her character, but also this guy completely forgets Rick despite him almost being killed by Rick, and going all throughout time to look for and beat up Rick. I mean, the show has changed a lot since season 2, so it's not really that big of a deal. But moving on, in one of the coldest moments of the entire show, Morty gets the last laugh and slaps Evil Morty in the face. Evil Morty gets crazy defensive, but Morty is the one in power, and at the end of the day, he won. At the end of the episode, Rick points out, like he does a lot of the time on premieres, about the ongoing new season, and then the rest of the family talk about how glad they were they didn't have to end up using some slurs. However, Summer says that they should say them anyways, and for some reason, Beth and Summer are really disgusted by whatever Jerry ended up saying, so I can only imagine what Jerry did say. As for the post-credit scene, Evil Morty gets walked to his cell where he realizes how miserable his life in prison is going to be. I can only wonder how he ends up escaping space prison, as I'm sure he will, but who knows? We probably won't find out for another 2 years or so. Anyways, I really liked this episode. I hope you did too. The name choice was perfect because Evil Morty and our Morty fighting for Rick is just like There's Something About Mary. Season 9 is off to a good start. Hopefully you can continue that way. And with that note, subscribe to never miss an upload, and I'll see you next week for episode 2.